The words hit harder than the mop bucket crashing to the floor. "You're just a janitor. Don't you know your place?" Preston Harrington's voice echoed through the empty corridor of his crumbling snack empire, unaware that the woman he'd just humiliated was about to save everything he'd built. 4:47 a.m., Harrington Snacks factory floor. While most of the world slept, Catalina Rivera's weathered hands pushed through the heavy glass doors of Harrington Snacks Inc. The silence felt sacred. These were her moments, before the chaos of corporate machinery drowned out every whisper of possibility. She'd been arriving at this exact time for 3 years, her footsteps creating a steady rhythm against polished concrete floors that gleamed under harsh industrial lighting. Catalina moved with purpose, not resignation. Each swipe of her mop held intention. Every surface she cleaned became a canvas of order in a world determined to dismiss her existence. The chemical tang of industrial cleaners mixed with lingering traces of corn syrup and artificial flavoring, scents that would suffocate most people but had become Catalina's morning meditation. The factory hummed with sleeping potential. Conveyor belts lay still like frozen rivers. Massive mixing vats stood empty, waiting for another day of producing the same bland snacks that had once dominated grocery store shelves. But those days were ending, and everyone knew it except the man who ruled this place. 7:23 a.m. The collision. Preston Harrington's Italian leather shoes clicked against the floor with the arrogance of a man who believed his footsteps mattered more than anyone else's. At 52, he carried himself like royalty visiting peasants, his tailored suit a armor against the working class he commanded but never understood. When he rounded the corner near production line C, Catalina was there, kneeling beside a spilled bucket, gathering scattered cleaning supplies with the same care most people reserved for precious things. "What the hell is this mess?" Preston's voice cut through the morning quiet like broken glass. Catalina looked up, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington. Just a small spill. I'll have it cleaned in." "You're just a janitor. Don't you know your place?" The words hung in the air like poison. Preston stepped over the spilled water, his shoes splashing carelessly as he continued toward the executive elevator, leaving Catalina kneeling in the puddle of his contempt. But what Preston Harrington didn't see was the fire that ignited behind Catalina's calm brown eyes. What he couldn't know was that this woman he'd just crushed carried recipes passed down through generations, flavors that could resurrect his dying empire if he wasn't too proud to taste them. Meanwhile, 30th floor executive conference room. "Sales are down 47% this quarter." The words fell like hammer blows on the mahogany table where 6 panicked executives sat staring at blood-red charts. "If we don't find a breakthrough product in the next 6 months, we're looking at massive layoffs." Preston's empire was crumbling, one quarterly report at a time. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Hit that like button and let's continue this journey together. But Preston Harrington had no idea who he was talking to. Catalina Rivera wasn't born to clean floors. She was born to create. 28 years earlier, her parents had crossed borders carrying nothing but courage and a collection of handwritten recipes wrapped in faded cloth. Her mother, Elena, could transform simple ingredients into magic that made neighbors gather around their tiny kitchen table. Her father, Miguel, worked double shifts at 3 different jobs, his calloused hands proof of his devotion to building something better for his daughter. "Mia," Elena would whisper as she taught young Catalina to balance cumin and paprika. "Cooking is love made visible. Never forget where your flavors come from." Those childhood afternoons felt like distant dreams now. Catalina had once planned to study culinary arts, her acceptance letter to the Institute of Culinary Education still tucked inside her jewelry box at home. But when her father's back injury ended his construction career, dreams became luxuries they couldn't afford. The janitor position at Harrington Snacks paid the bills and covered her parents' medical expenses, noble work that demanded sacrifice. Yet Preston's cruelty that morning had awakened something fierce within her. 9:30 p.m., Catalina's apartment kitchen. While Preston probably sipped expensive scotch in his penthouse, Catalina stood before her grandmother's wooden spice rack, fingers tracing jars filled with treasures most Americans had never tasted. chipotle peppers that carried smoke like whispered secrets, achiote that painted food the color of sunset, Mexican oregano that her abuela had sworn could cure both heartbreak and hunger. She pulled out a notebook, pages already filled with experimental combinations she'd been testing for months. Not for Preston's company, but for her own curiosity. What if someone took the artificial cheese powder coating those tasteless factory snacks and replaced it with something real? Something that honored the complexity of actual flavor? Catalina heated oil in her cast-iron skillet, the same pan her mother had brought from Guadalajara 30 years ago. She tossed in corn kernels, watching them dance and pop. Then came the magic, a careful blend of chili lime seasoning, cotija cheese, and her secret weapon, a touch of chocolate powder that would add depth without sweetness. The aroma filled her cramped kitchen like a celebration. She tasted her creation, eyes closing as flavors built layers on her tongue. This wasn't just seasoning, this was storytelling. Each bite carried generations of tradition, the kind of authentic experience that corporate focus groups could never manufacture. Meanwhile, Preston's world hung. While Catalina crafted poetry with peppers, Preston's world operated in spreadsheets and sterile boardrooms. His penthouse apartment resembled a hotel suite, expensive, impressive, empty. He'd never cooked a meal in his life, never understood that food could be anything more than fuel or profit margins. When he dismissed Catalina that morning, he'd seen only what his privilege allowed him to see. A woman with a mop, someone beneath his consideration. He couldn't recognize genius wearing work boots, couldn't imagine that innovation might smell like Camino instead of cologne. The quiet revolution. Every night that week, Catalina returned to her kitchen laboratory. She documented each experiment, refining ratios, perfecting techniques her grandmother had taught her decades before. Corporate America decided what constituted good food. Each flavor she created was an act of rebellion against Preston's dismissal. Every taunt only fueled her inner fire, transforming humiliation into determination. She wasn't just mixing spices, she was preparing to prove that brilliance doesn't require corner offices or Ivy League degrees. It requires only the courage to believe your gifts matter, regardless of who tries to convince you otherwise. Drop a comment if you believe talent has no uniform, because this story is just getting started. While Preston dismissed his insignificant employees, his empire was collapsing around him. Harrington Snacks Inc., Executive Conference Room. The quarterly reports painted a devastating picture. Market share had plummeted from 62% to 31% in just 18 months. Competitors with names like Authentico Bites and Heritage Harvest were stealing customers with bold ethnic flavors that made Harrington's products taste like cardboard by comparison. Our demographic research shows consumers want real experiences, Marketing Director Janet Walsh announced, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. They're abandoning traditional snack brands for companies that celebrate cultural authenticity. Preston slammed his Mont Blanc pen against the mahogany table. Authenticity is just marketing nonsense. We built this company on consistency. Same taste, same quality, every time. But consistency had become predictability. Predictability had become irrelevance. Chief Financial Officer David Chen cleared his throat nervously. Preston, we need to face reality. If trends continue, we'll be forced to close 3 facilities by Christmas. That means laying off 800 employees. 800 families, 800 people like Catalina, whose paychecks disappeared because Preston refused to evolve. The competition. While Preston clung to his fading formulas, innovative startups were rewriting the rules. Abuela's Kitchen had launched with authentic Mexican street corn flavoring that sent customers into social media frenzies. Seoul Spice Co. combined Korean gochujang with American snack classics, creating fusion products that sold out within hours of hitting shelves. These weren't massive corporations with $100 million advertising budgets. They were small companies founded by immigrants and first-generation Americans who understood something Preston never learned. People crave connection to real culture, not artificial approximations of it. Factory floor whispers. 3 floors below Preston's panic room, factory workers huddled during their 15-minute breaks, voices heavy with worry. My cousin works at Authentico, said Luis from packaging. Says they can't keep up with orders. People drive 2 hours just to buy their jalapeno lime chips. Catalina listened from the corner where she organized cleaning supplies, her heart aching as she heard fear creep into her colleagues' voices. These were good people. Hard workers supporting families, paying mortgages, dreaming of better futures for their children. Maria from quality control shook her head sadly. 23 years I've worked here. Never seen morale this low. Management doesn't want our ideas. They just want us to keep making the same flavorless garbage while real companies eat our lunch. The moment of recognition. That afternoon, Catalina was emptying trash bins near the executive offices when Preston's booming voice carried through his partially open door. Damn it, we need something revolutionary. Something that captures this authentic flavor trend before we lose everything. His desperation was evident, even through his arrogance. The man who dismissed her that morning was now begging the universe for exactly what she'd been perfecting in her kitchen every night. Catalina paused, her hand gripping the trash bag tighter. The irony wasn't lost on her. Preston was searching for salvation, while the solution walked his halls wearing a janitor's uniform, invisible to his privileged gaze. The very culture he'd spent decades ignoring held the key to rescuing his crumbling empire. Subscribe if you love seeing karma in action, because Preston Harrington's world is about to get turned upside down. That autumn night, as bitter wind rattled the factory windows, a quiet revolution began. 10:47 p.m., Harrington Snacks Factory. Catalina's keycard beeped softly as she entered the empty production facility. Officially, she was here for deep cleaning maintenance, a legitimate reason that provided perfect cover for her real mission. The factory felt different after hours, like a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened by the right touch. She made her way to Storage Room B, where rejected product batches sat in cardboard boxes marked disposal. Preston's company threw away thousands of pounds of perfectly edible base snacks simply because they didn't meet his rigid specifications. Slightly irregular shapes, minor color variations, texture inconsistencies that only machines detected. What Preston saw as waste, Catalina saw as opportunity. She selected several pounds of plain corn chips, their golden surfaces blank canvases for her vision. From her backpack, she withdrew her secret arsenal. Small containers of spices she'd ground at home, each one carrying the soul of her heritage. The creation, working by the glow of safety lighting, Catalina spread the chips across metal baking sheets. Her movements were ritualistic, reverent. This wasn't just seasoning, it was cultural resurrection. First came the foundation, a blend of dried chilies she'd toasted and ground herself. Guajillo for sweetness, chipotle for smoke, cayenne for heat that built slowly rather than assaulting the palate. The aroma rose like incense, filling the sterile factory air with warmth. She drizzled the chips with oil infused with garlic and lime, each drop carrying memories of her grandmother's hands teaching her the sacred ratios. Too little, and the flavors wouldn't bloom. Too much, and the delicate balance would collapse. Next came the cheese blend. Not the artificial powder Preston's factory produced, but real cotija mixed with aged queso añejo that she'd grated by hand. She added a whisper of chocolate powder, so subtle that most people would taste richness without identifying its source. The final touch was her secret weapon: ground pumpkin seeds mixed with Mexican oregano and a trace of cinnamon. This combination would create complexity that unfolded in waves, keeping customers reaching for more. Catalina slid the trays into one of the facility's smaller ovens, setting the temperature low and slow. As heat worked its magic, the factory filled with an aroma that had never existed within these walls, the scent of authenticity, of tradition, of flavors that told stories instead of simply satisfying hunger. The Discovery 6:15 a.m. next morning. Rodrigo Mendoza arrived early, as always. As production supervisor, he prided himself on knowing every sound, every smell of his domain. But this morning, something was different. Instead of the usual chemical tang of cleaning solutions, his nostrils detected something extraordinary. Following the scent like a bloodhound, he traced it to Storage Room B, where he found Catalina carefully packing small samples into clear containers. "Dios mío," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "What is that incredible smell?" Catalina froze, her heart hammering. She'd been caught. But when she turned to face Rodrigo, She saw curiosity rather than accusation in his weathered face. "Just experimenting," she said carefully. Rodrigo's eyes fell on the sample containers. "May I?" With trembling fingers, Catalina offered him a chip dusted with her creation. She watched his face as he bit down, saw his eyes widen as flavors cascaded across his palate. "Increíble!" he exclaimed, reaching for another sample. This is what our people actually want to eat. Real flavor, real culture. How did you?" "My grandmother's recipes," Catalina said quietly, "adapted for modern production." Rodrigo studied her with new respect. For 15 years, he'd watched this company ignore the Hispanic market that comprised 40% of their region's population. He'd submitted proposals for authentic ethnic flavors, only to have them dismissed as too niche or too complex for mass production. Now a janitor had solved what MBA-educated executives couldn't, or wouldn't. The weight of possibility. As Rodrigo savored another sample, Catalina felt the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders. Every recipe her grandmother had shared, every story her mother had told about their homeland's rich culinary traditions, all of it lived within these simple seasoned chips. But would anyone in Preston's sterile corporate hierarchy listen to a janitor's revolution? The answer would determine whether authentic culture could triumph over artificial profits, whether truth could defeat prejudice. The revolution had begun in secret. Soon it would demand to be heard. The boardroom fell silent. Every executive stared in disbelief as the woman they'd ignored stepped forward with the solution to save them all. Tuesday, 2:30 p.m. emergency board meeting. Crisis hung in the air like smoke. 6 board members sat around the polished conference table, their faces etched with the kind of desperation that comes when quarterly projections show complete annihilation. The latest market research lay scattered before them, devastating proof that Harrington snacks had become irrelevant in an industry they once dominated. Preston paced behind his chair like a caged predator, his usual arrogance replaced by barely controlled panic. "We need solutions, not more data about our failures. Does anyone have an actual plan to save this company?" CFO David Chen shuffled through reports with shaking hands. "Preston, we're hemorrhaging customers to ethnic food brands. Our core demographic is abandoning us for companies that offer authentic cultural experiences." "Cultural experiences?" Preston's voice dripped with disdain. "It's food, not a museum exhibit." That's when Rodrigo Mendoza cleared his throat. As production supervisor, he rarely spoke during executive meetings, but today felt different. Today, he carried hope in his jacket pocket. "Actually," Rodrigo said, his voice steady despite the roomful of suits staring at him, "I think I know someone who might have the breakthrough we need." Preston's eyebrows shot up. "You? What could you possibly know about market strategy?" "I know about flavor," Rodrigo replied, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small container. "And I know about authenticity." He opened the container, releasing an aroma that immediately commanded attention. Rich, complex, unmistakably appetizing. Nothing like the artificial scents that usually emerged from their production lines. "Where did this come from?" Marketing Director Janet Walsh leaned forward, her nose twitching with interest. "From someone who understands what our customers actually want," Rodrigo said. "Someone who's been working under our roof for 3 years, invisible to everyone who matters." The conference room door opened softly. Catalina Rivera stepped inside, no longer wearing her janitor's uniform. Instead, she wore simple dark slacks and a white blouse, her hair pulled back professionally, carrying a leather portfolio that had belonged to her father during his brief attempt at starting his own business. Preston's face drained of color. "What is she doing here?" "Her name is Catalina Rivera," Rodrigo announced, "and she's created something that could save this company." Catalina moved to the head of the table with quiet confidence, placing her portfolio beside Preston's abandoned reports. She'd spent 3 years being invisible in this room during her cleaning duties, observing these executives panic about problems she could have solved if anyone had thought to ask. "Mr. Harrington," she began, her voice calm but carrying undercurrents of strength that hadn't been there during their hallway encounter. "Your company is failing because you've forgotten that food is culture. People don't just want snacks, they want connection to something real." Preston's jaw clenched. "I'm not interested in thoughts from someone who cleans my floors." The words hit the air like a slap, but this time, Catalina didn't flinch. Instead, she opened her portfolio and spread out papers covered with detailed notes, market analysis, and flavor profiles she'd researched during her off hours. "Then you're not interested in saving your company," she replied evenly. "Because while you've been dismissing your own employees, I've been studying why your competitors are winning." She pulled out Rodrigo's sample container and placed it in the center of the table. "This represents a 40% untapped market in your own region. Hispanic consumers with disposable income who are desperate for authentic flavors from brands they can trust." Board member Patricia Williams, who'd remained silent until now, reached for a sample. Her eyes widened as she tasted it. "This is extraordinary. The complexity, the balance, it's unlike anything we've ever produced." "Because it's real," Catalina continued, gaining momentum. "No artificial flavoring, no focus group compromises, just traditional recipes adapted for modern production, created by someone who actually understands the culture you're trying to reach." Chief Operating Officer Michael Foster set down his sample with obvious amazement. "The cost analysis, what are we looking at for production scaling?" Catalina flipped to another page, revealing detailed calculations she'd worked out during countless late nights. 30% higher profit margins than your current product line, with ingredients that cost less than your artificial flavor compounds. Preston stood frozen, watching his board members rally around ideas from the woman he'd humiliated. The power in the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. "How long have you been developing this?" Janet Walsh asked, her marketing mind already spinning with possibilities. 3 years, Catalina answered, looking directly at Preston. "Since the first day someone told me I should know my place." The boardroom erupted in excited discussion about market positioning, production timelines, and demographic targeting. But Preston heard none of it. He could only stare at the woman who'd just exposed his greatest weakness: his inability to recognize genius when it didn't come wearing an expensive suit. The janitor had become the savior. The revolution was no longer secret. 6 months later, the name Crimson Inferno Bites wasn't just on every shelf, it was on every tongue. The market explosion. The numbers told a story that even Preston's Harvard MBA couldn't have predicted. Within 90 days of launch, Crimson Inferno Bites had captured 18% of the regional spicy snack market. Grocery chains from Texas to California were calling daily, begging for larger shipments as customers cleared shelves faster than trucks could restock them. Social media exploded with videos of people trying the chips for the first time, their faces lighting up with recognition and joy. Crimson Inferno became a trending hashtag, with food bloggers declaring it the most authentic, mass-produced snack in America. But the real victory wasn't in the sales figures, it was in the comments. "Finally, a company that gets our flavors right," wrote Maria Gonzalez from Phoenix. "These taste like my abuela's kitchen. I'm crying happy tears," posted Carlos Mendez from San Antonio. "My kids are learning about their heritage through these snacks. Thank you for honoring our culture," shared Isabella Rodriguez from Los Angeles. Industry transformation. Crimson Inferno Bites didn't just save Harrington snacks, it revolutionized the entire industry. Competing companies scrambled to hire cultural consultants and develop their own authentic ethnic flavors. Trade publications featured cover stories about the Hispanic market revolution and why authenticity beats artificial every time. Food Network approached Catalina for interviews. Forbes wanted to feature her innovation story. The Hispanic Chamber of Commerce invited her to speak at their annual conference about entrepreneurship and cultural pride. But the moment that mattered most came on a Tuesday morning when Catalina walked through the factory floor she'd once cleaned, now wearing the title of Director of Cultural Innovation. Preston's Reckoning. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., but Preston had been pacing his office since dawn. Admitting error had never been part of his vocabulary, yet today's announcement would require exactly that. When the cameras rolled, Preston stood at the podium looking like a man who'd been forced to swallow his own arrogance. Behind him, a massive banner displayed Crimson Inferno Bites alongside the company's quarterly profits, the highest in Harrington Snack's 40-year history. 6 months ago, Preston began, his voice strained with reluctant humility. "I made a mistake that nearly cost this company everything. I dismissed an employee's idea not because it lacked merit, but because I couldn't see past my own prejudices." He paused, visibly struggling with words he'd never expected to speak publicly. Catalina Rivera didn't just create a successful product. She saved 800 jobs, revitalized our brand, and taught us that innovation comes from every corner of our workforce, not just the executive suite. The emotional climax. As Preston spoke, Catalina stood with her parents in the front row of the press conference. Elena Rivera clutched her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Miguel Rivera, his back still bearing the scars of years of physical labor, stood straighter than he had in decades. This was more than corporate success. This was cultural validation. Every recipe dismissed as too ethnic, every tradition overlooked as unmarketable, every voice silenced as insignificant had found vindication through their daughter's courage. Preston concluded his remarks with words that would be quoted in business schools for years to come. The janitor had saved the empire. And in doing so, she taught us that genius wears many uniforms. We just have to be humble enough to recognize it. The room erupted in applause, but Catalina's focus remained on her parents' proud faces. She'd proven that authenticity could triumph over artificial profits, that cultural heritage possessed value beyond corporate spreadsheets. Her grandmother's recipes hadn't just seasoned snacks, they'd seasoned justice. Hit subscribe if this story moved you, because every overlooked person deserves to see their worth recognized. Today, Catalina Rivera's story isn't just about snacks. It's about the power that lives in every overlooked person, walking through doors marked staff only, sitting in the back of conference rooms, or cleaning offices while dreams simmer quietly in their hearts. The ripple effect. Harrington Snacks became more than a comeback story. It became a blueprint for corporate transformation. The company instituted innovation hours, where employees from every department could pitch ideas without regard to their job title or educational background. The maintenance crew suggested cost-saving equipment modifications. Cafeteria workers proposed healthier lunch options that boosted productivity. Night security guards identified efficiency improvements that saved thousands of dollars monthly. Preston, humbled by his near-catastrophic blindness, established the Catalina Rivera Innovation Fund, a program providing seed money for employee-driven product development. The first grant went to a packaging line worker whose idea for biodegradable chip bags revolutionized their environmental impact. Beyond the factory floor, Catalina's influence extended far beyond corporate walls. She spoke at universities, community centers, and immigrant resource organizations, sharing a message that resonated across every industry. Your background isn't your limitation, it's your superpower. Her TED Talk, The Genius in Work Boots, garnered 12 million views and sparked conversations about workplace hierarchy, cultural value, and hidden talent in boardrooms worldwide. Fortune 500 companies began reassessing their innovation strategies, realizing they'd been ignoring their greatest assets, the diverse perspectives of their entire workforce. The universal truth, Catalina's triumph, revealed something profound about human potential. In every workplace, every community, every family gathering, there are untapped reservoirs of brilliance waiting to be recognized. The shy administrative assistant might hold the key to streamlining operations. The night janitor could possess the cultural insight that opens new markets. The part-time employee working 3 jobs might harbor the next breakthrough innovation. Society teaches us to equate worth with titles, degrees, and corner offices. But real innovation flows from lived experience, cultural wisdom, and the courage to speak truth to power when the stakes matter most. The continuing story today, Catalina Rivera serves as Chief Innovation Officer at Harrington Snacks, leading a team that celebrates authentic flavors from cultures worldwide. Her parents visit the factory monthly, their pride evident as they watch their daughter's recipes feed millions of families across America. Preston learned to listen before speaking, to question before dismissing, to recognize that leadership means elevating others rather than diminishing them. But perhaps the most powerful legacy isn't corporate success or personal vindication. It's the countless people who heard Catalina's story and decided to share their own gifts with the world. regardless of who might initially dismiss them. Because greatness is often lurking where it's least expected, waiting for someone brave enough to believe it belongs. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because their breakthrough might be one conversation away.